Hello and welcome to the Raw podcast brought to you by the Sunderland Echo. And today we're going to be looking ahead to Sunderland's championship fixture against Bristol City at the Stadium of Light. So to preview the match, joining myself, Joe Nicholson, we are joined by Jordan Jones from Bristol World. Jordan, how's things?
It's going well, thank you. How about yourself, Joe?
Yeah, it's going pretty well. We've got two teams looks like in pretty good form, which we'll come on to later in the podcast. And yeah, I think it's going pretty well for both Sunderland and Bristol City. So looking forward to a good game at the Stadium of Light on Saturday. But Bristol City, Jordan, they may be 16th in the table, but just looking at their kind of recent results, they're actually unbeaten in 10 games, a few FA Cup games in there as well. So how would you kind of assess the moves in the camp and their form coming into this game?
There's a lot of positivity around the place at Bristol City at the moment. It's very much different to what it was just after the World Cup break, around that winter period time, around Christmas time, where there was a bit of a worry that Nigel Pearson was going to lose his job. A few fans, I suppose, were getting on his back. And it was the game against West Brom on Boxing Day where I think a few fans booed and were chanting that they wanted Pearson out. And then the mood is now completely different at Ashton Gate. Fans and players and management staff are all singing on the same hymn sheet. I think that they think that they've had a good transfer window, and obviously that's coincided with a good run of form. Homegrown talent is still a large part of what Bristol City are all about. They've had a good transfer window, good run of form. Looking at the table, 16 is a bit surprising, but I suppose that's just because of their bad run of form. Obviously, when they had a similar unbeaten run at the start of the season and then went out of form, but I can't imagine it won't be too long that they won't try and ascend up the table.
Yeah, well, we say they're 16th in the table, but just looking at it now, it is incredibly tight as it's kind of been all season. So Sunderland are in 5th on 48 points, Bristol City down in 16th on 40 points. So a win could move them into the top half of the table. So still very tight. And is there kind of still talk of maybe a late playoff push, or what are kind of the expectations at Bristol City now at the minute?
I think the P word playoffs isn't a word that I think is spoken about between I think the squad, not publicly at least, and Nigel Pearson. I think he played down that last week, even though they beat Norwich. I think he's just focusing on that kind of one game mantra, the next game that they focus on, and things like that. I think you do see some teams. I think Blackpool in 09-10 was one of them where they just come out of nowhere and then they get into the playoffs. There's teams that are like that will try and get into the top six. But I think a lot has changed in the Championship, is that a lot of teams just have that financial power. A lot of the teams have parachute payments and things like that. And so if they do miss out on the playoff spot, I don't necessarily think it's a bad season. I think they just want an improvement on the last two seasons, finishes under Pearson. I think 17th and 18th. I think the top half finish would probably be befitting of this team that Nigel Pearson currently has.
Mm-hmm. Well, the last time we saw Bristol City, it was all the way back in August. It was Sunderland's first away game of the season. Quite an entertaining game as well. 3-2 it finished to Sunderland. Sunderland's goal scorers that day, 2 for Ellis Sims and 1 for Ross Stewart. Neither of them will be playing on Saturday. Stewart, of course, is injured, and Sims been recalled by Everton. But from a Bristol City point of view, Jordan, what's changed since then, since that game back in August, kind of personnel-wise, and the style of the way the team are playing at the minute?
I just remember that game for just how good Sims was as well. Quality performance of him. And I think, obviously, if he was a pick of the Championship, I think, is that obviously it's a shame that he's gone back to Everton now, but that was such a good performance from him. And quite a bit has changed. I think one of the goals that Sims scored, that Naismith was caught in possession, and I think he was punished for that as well. Now, he was signed as a centre-back. He wanted to go into it was a free at the back system that City had been playing a lot during Nigel Pearson's tenure, and sometimes this is the debate whether it's what the team needs and what a manager prefers. Obviously, sometimes a manager will come in and be like, right, I want to play this system and this formation. Sometimes a manager takes a different approach and it's like, well, this squad can't play 4-4-2 or 4-3-3, so I've got to play at this system. Over the last month, which has coincided with a good run of form, is that they've ditched the 5 at the back system now, and they've now gone to a 4 at the back system. And surprisingly, you think more defenders equals more clean sheets, more defensive solidity, but actually the 4 at the back system has actually worked a bit better in City's favour. And you've got George Tanner right back, Cameron Pring left back, and then you've got the centre back partnership with Atkinson and Zach Viner, and that's quite a youthful back line. I think Viner might be the oldest player in that back line. I think 25 is the oldest, or 26 is the oldest in that back line. So it's a youthful back line, but what we've seen from City in previous, under Pearson, is that sometimes they're naive and they can see goals that are cheap and they get punished. And every press conference, if they lose, I think Sunderland was one where you hate to see those mistakes. And we're not seeing that many mistakes now from this Bristol City defence. Is that they're becoming a bit more streetwise, is the easy way to put it. Is that they're doing the dark arts of the game. They're seeing out games. And you only have to look at a clean sheet against a Norwich team that has Timu Pukki, that this youthful back line can deal with that. You've got that back 4, and then in the midfield 3, you'd have Alex Scott, Matty James, and it was Cal Naismith. Naismith, I don't think he's played everywhere in his career. I think he was a left winger, and then he turned into a full back, and then he was a centre back at Bristol City, and now he moved into centre defensive midfield, and he did a really good job there. He's injured and he'll miss out on this game, so Joe Williams came in for him. In the past few games, it doesn't look like he's been out of place. He's waited for his opportunities. I think Nigel Pearson said he's waited for his opportunity, and he was frustrated with his opportunities, but now he is slotted into that role, and that allows Scott to be the most advanced of the midfield 3. And obviously you've got a bit of a change now. So on Wednesday they changed it up a bit because obviously the double game week, but the usual attack would be Mark Sykes, who's been well in form. I think 5 goals in 6 championship matches, Sam Bell on the left, and then Naki Wells at front. But because they've signed players like Anis Mehmeti and Harry Cornick, there's different options off of the bench now, and obviously we've seen players leave like Antoine Semenyo as well.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier Rob Atkinson, who some fans may remember a few weeks ago that Nigel Pearson kind of quite publicly left him out the side, wasn't he? And he was asked about it because he was playing Matty James, a centre midfielder, at centre back, and there was a bit of confusion there. But it looks like now Atkinson has come back into the team and kind of solidified that back line, like you say. And it looks like, are they much more now a tougher team to beat, would you say, than before that kind of spell where Atkinson was out of the team?
Yeah, so it was Andy King,
Andy King,
which was quite a weird thing because obviously he's won the Premier League title with Leicester in midfield, and he's gone into centre back. But yeah, I think Atkinson spoke recently actually, and he kind of took on that leadership role in the other tournaments, even though it was like 2 games or something at most. He said he had to take on a leadership role because he was the oldest player, and he says I think he's 24 or 25, and like he's saying that like I've never been the oldest player on the pitch, and he was at that stage. I think he's really benefiting from Zach Viner, and I did ask him. One player is kind of similar to Atkinson, is that Atkinson obviously was in League One before he came to Bristol City, so he's had that year last year, and last year I think he was out for a few months at least. I think he suffered illness and was out for a few months, and then came back, and I think he'd lost a lot of weight, and he had to get to grips with that, and he's still playing on the back 5, and obviously they were shipping a lot of goals, but he's built up a really good partnership with Zach Viner, and his centre-back partner, Zach Viner, we thought he was going to leave in the summer, but now he's a fan favourite, fans sing his name, and obviously he's homegrown and things like that, so the 2 centre-backs are really hard to beat, and you could put the most goal-scoring striker in the championship, the top scorer in the championship, and I think that they would struggle to get there. You only have to see what happened with Timu Pukki, is that he was kept out. I think he had 1 shot, he could barely get a sniffer goal, so it just shows that those defenders, despite being so young, are really learning what it is about to defend in the championship.
You mentioned earlier that maybe there was perhaps a bit of pressure growing on Pearson, maybe before the World Cup break or just afterwards. What's kind of the feeling now among supporters? Are they quite happy with him in charge to take the team forward, or is there still a few that are not quite convinced by his kind of methods?
I think it's a weird one because obviously when Pearson joined, I think his last job was Watford in the Premier League, and so it's not necessarily a drop down, but obviously you have those expectations that you want to manage a team that at least they're going to be challenging for promotion. But I think people really appreciate the job that Pearson has done in that when he came in, he's had to really overhaul the squad. The team, obviously you have to navigate through financial fair play. You have to try and avoid being punished, and it looks like, touch wood, that they will avoid that. There won't be any points deduction, because in previous years they had to rely on big sales of their players, and obviously the market has changed completely. But the wage bill is going down considerably. The losses are going down. So there's less money that's going out of the club, and they're still trying to remain competitive. I think that he's in the second year. He'll celebrate his second year at the club next week, next Thursday, and he'll have 2 years there into a 3-year contract. And kind of his message was, if I don't take you to the Premier League, it's kind of like I've put the foundations in place. And sometimes it's not nice. Like, every club wants to be successful at the end of the season. They want to be in the playoffs, so they want to be promoted. No one wants to be relegated. But I think the City fans can understand that they've got to go through a few years of perhaps mid-table finishes and things like that to accept, and then obviously then they can try and challenge for promotion again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Nigel Pearson's one of the most longest-serving managers in the Championship, isn't he? Maybe second or
third, I think.
Although I think half the team have changed him. I think I was looking at a stat the other day. Tony Mowbray's like 12th longest-serving manager, and he was only appointed earlier this season. So they do seem to have a bit of stability there with Pearson. But how do you think he'll set his side up on Saturday? Come into the Stadium of Light. When I've seen Bristol City, or even earlier in the season, it looked like they were quite good going forward, but there were kind of gaps at the back, as we've kind of touched on before. It looks like they've maybe improved at the back, but how do you see them kind of setting up, coming away to Sunderland and playing at the Stadium of Light?
So when you have like a pre-match press conference, I think you ask questions about the opposition. I think Pearson doesn't really divulge too much about the opposition. He might praise them a little bit, but I think he's always a manager that doesn't really focus on the opposition. He focuses on the strengths ultimately. So he's always like, focus on our strengths, and then the work will come after that, really. So I don't see a change in shape or things like that. There's no one really that's missing that was missing beforehand as well. So I can't see much personnel changing. I think we might go back to the team that beat Norwich. I know Mehmeti made his debut, and Mehmeti made his first start, and Cornick came on, and things like that. But I can't see them starting, just because they've drawn with Wigan and they played well. They dominated in a way, but I think they'll just go back to what it was, is that they've given a breather now. Mark Sykes, I think, will come back in, and then you'll have Sam Bowell on the left, and that just offers a bit more. On the road, I think you've just got to go for it, really, and I can't see much changing. They might have to be a bit more streetwise, and the midfield battle, I think, will determine that. Matty James is a player that in recent weeks he goes under the radar. So if you're doing your player ratings, you're not going to give him like an 8 or a 9, but he's someone that's like a solid 7 or something, because his work goes under the radar, and I think he'll be a player that kind of determines what happens in that match as well. I think the only thing to worry about is Alex Scott is on 9 yellow cards, and he was asked Pearson earlier this week, kind of, does that come into his thinking? Do you take him out? Because I think he's got 6 more games to get through before avoiding the 2-game ban. So that's one thing, is that I think if the Sunderland players wanted to pick out on Alex Scott, that's the one thing to note, is that all he has to do is get a yellow card and he's up for the next 2 games. Obviously, it might not impact the game too much for Sunderland, but obviously he's walking on a tightrope, obviously, having to deal with that suspension that's hanging over his head.
Mm-hmm. Well, Sunderland's last game at the Stadium of Light, they played Reading at home, and it was quite clear that Reading had come for probably a point. They were trying to waste time at every opportunity, and in the end, Sunderland managed to get the goal about 6 minutes from the end through Patrick Roberts. But how do you think Bristol City would approach it? Will they be coming and maybe happy to try and hit them on the counter-attack and try and concede possession, or will they try and come and have the ball and try and really pose Sunderland some threats in possession? What do you think?
Yeah, there was a statistic at the start of the season, and it went when it went to the middle of the season, and actually City couldn't win games if they had more possession.
Right.
And against Wigan, I think they had more possession, but Wigan were just a tough nut to crack. They just couldn't get into them. Obviously, they opened the scoring, and then Wigan equalised, and then they had better the opportunities. City are a counter-attacking team, so that's what I think will happen. And that just, I think you have to allow for that. The home team usually has more possession, but City's strengths are being a good counter-attacking team. And this change of shape, you've got 2 wingers that can easily just take on their man. They're both speedsters, and they can break a down the defenders. So I think they'll be a counter-attacking team, but that's not a team that's going to set up shop. They're not going to try and frustrate Sunderland. I think it's just as their key strengths are being counter-attacking teams, and sometimes when they're on the break, you're worrying as a defender. So yeah, like I say, it's not that obviously they just want to set up shop, part the bus, and things like that. I just think that's their strength.
Mm-hmm. And we mentioned there's been changes in Sunderland's kind of attacking line since that game against Bristol City back at Ashton Gate in August. Also been changes in the Bristol City lineup as well. Looking, Chris Martin scored that day in the 3-2 back in August. He's no longer at the club. I was just looking at their top scorers as well. Naki Wells is their top scorer with 9 league goals, but he didn't start against Wigan in midweek. So who are kind of the key attacking players? I know you mentioned Alex Scott before, is a very young player who's coming through and looked very good this season, but who are the other kind of players in and around him that Sunderland will have to be wary of on Saturday?
If Mark Sykes does start, I do think that he'll be a handful for the Sunderland defenders. One player that obviously I've mentioned before, but Sam Bell from their academy last year, he came on at wing back or something. I think against Birmingham, he had a horrible day, and something that they put behind him. He was scoring the under-21s this season now. He's kind of, I think it's a few weeks ago on the EFL show that they said, Dean Ashton said that he was kind of a replacement for Antoine Semenyo. So he's playing on the left-hand side, and he's quite fearless. Against Swansea, I think he scored one of the goals of the round, the way he just dribbled through the defence and managed to score. And he scored a brace against West Brom, the FA Cup as well. So he's one player, I think, that if you don't know too much about him, you will know a lot about him. Obviously, when the game comes, and if he does start as well, I think he scored his first championship goal against Preston a few weeks ago. So he's still getting to grips with the championship, but he's a player that I suppose can have that similar influence as Scott and Semenyo as well. And it's just interesting to see how much the squad has changed since then. It's because last season, Chris Martin and Antoine Semenyo were part of a three-man trio that was served them so well with Vyman, Semenyo and Martin. And now things have changed. The team isn't relying, I suppose, on one player. Naki Wells has done well to come out of the shadows where he wasn't getting opportunities, and now he's scoring. So a lot of players in that attacking line that can cause problems, but also a mention has to go out to Anis Mehmeti. I think if you're in the championship and you're a lower half championship team, you have to sign Mehmeti, and I think Bristol City have got an unearthed gem here. They've not had to spend too much and not had to break the bank to sign him, but he's going to be one of those players, and I suppose in a few years' time, the championship will be fully aware of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sunderland have come up against Mehmeti before when he played for Wycombe last season in League One, so they'll know a bit about him, but they also know a bit about Semenyo as well. You mentioned there, who's obviously now moved on in January, but just how much have they missed him? Because you mentioned he was a key player last season, and have they kind of managed to replace what he offered? I think he was injured, wasn't he, for the game at Ashton Gate when Sunderland played him, but as you said, he was a key player last season.
Yeah, so he was a key player for him last season, and he worked up a good partnership with Martin. Vyman was in the 10, and then Martin and Semenyo would be the strikers, and that's kind of what it was for most of the season. But because Semenyo was out for a few months at the start of the season, City have kind of just adapted to not having Semenyo. And that's not to downplay Semenyo's influence, because when Semenyo was at the club, Pearson said that Semenyo's a unique player. He's someone that we don't have anyone else that can do what he does as well. But I think so far this month that they've had without Semenyo, they've coped well with him. I think you'd have expected him to leave the club. Obviously, they extended his contract and then ultimately just got what they wanted for him. And a lot of that, I think fans weren't happy with the initial fee, but there's a lot of add-ons to that. But I think Martin going as well, getting released, that was always going to happen, just his lack of opportunities this season as well. But no surprise to see Semenyo go to the Premier League, but I think so far they've coped well. And I don't think they've bought their replacement yet. They've bought players like Mehmeti who can change the game on his own, but I think they've not broke the bank, as I said. So in the summer, I think that's when they'll spend more of the Semenyo money.
Mm-hmm. Well, just finally, Jordan, we usually finish our podcast by just asking our guests just for a quick score prediction, how we think the game is going to go on Saturday.
So I think the unbeaten run will continue for Bristol City, and I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw. I think, obviously, with Sunderland being in the top half in the playoffs, getting a point at the stadium would be a positive result for Bristol City. So I'm going to go 1-1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think Sunderland are in good form. Mowbray made a few changes at QPR on Tuesday night, so I can see kind of the players that he left on the bench for that game that then came on. People like Amaz, Dan Neil, Mishu might return to the starting 11 as well. So I think Sunderland are in good form, and I think at home they're starting to get some positive results as well. So I think they might just edge it 2-1, but we'll see. It's two good sides in good form at the minute, so should be a good game at the Stadium of Light on Saturday. But Jordan, thanks a lot for coming on the latest episode of the Raw podcast. You can subscribe to the Sunderland Echo for our premium content and ad light experience over on our website. And if you like what we do with the Raw podcast, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. For all the latest SFC news, you can head over to the SFC section of the Sunderland Echo website to find the thoughts of Sunderland head coach Tony Mowbray. He spoke to the media on Thursday, and we'll also have live updates and analysis from the Stadium of Light as Sunderland take on Bristol City on Saturday. Once again, thanks a lot for listening to the latest episode of the Raw podcast.